Hi, we continue in 2 Samuel 16 today, but beginning a new unit as Absalom consults both of the counselors, both who are former Davidic counselors, Ahithophel and Hushai, to decide what he should do now that King David has retreated all the way to the shores of the Jordan. So as we enter into this scene, please note on the right side what I've been going over since the introduction of this unit of 2 Samuel 15 to 18. Gone over some of the literary elements here, and most especially important is the interpretive options. I won't go over them again today, but if you haven't watched the introductory video, I encourage you to do that, where I discuss the relevance of these. And then we look at the shape. So today we switched from having had two scenes with David exiting Jerusalem and his entourage coming down the Mount of Olives, and now we get Absalom's consultation, and in the next scene they will prepare for battle, and the battle will ensue, and spoiler alert, David's going to win and Absalom's going to be dead hanging in a tree. But perhaps you already knew that. And one of the things we've also been looking at is how this unit has so many different characters and places, although we don't meet anybody new this time. We've already met Ahithophel and Hushai, and so next time we'll meet Amasa and some of these other people who accompany David along the way. So as we look at this new unit, a couple of things on keywords and shape. If I back out to see the whole unit here from 16:15 to 17:14, you can see there's a little chiasm in Hushai's speech here. It's a very nice tight chiasm, although I've seen no other scholars who note it. You can see here the parallel at the front and the back with father as a warrior and his men are warriors. The analogy from animals, both bringing up the bear and the lion that David said when he was, if you will, interviewed for the role of defeating Goliath, that he said he'd already fought, and then the centerpiece here. And one of the elements that many scholars have noted is Ahithophel's speech is straightforward and simple. It's just right here, first to go up into your father's concubines, and that happens in just one sentence, and then a simple instruction to put him in the charge of 12,000 men, and they'll go assassinate the king, and that'll be that. But when we get back to Hushai fills his speech, as you can see here, with analogies and similes and metaphors and all kinds of flowery talk, and it goes on much farther. You can see it's all this down here, full of these things like the sand of the sea and all these things. And it also puts Absalom at the center, whereas Ahithophel put him at the center and Absalom on the side, something like a knight or a bishop in a chess game, leaving the king back in the palace. Absalom wants to be in the center of it, and that will be his downfall, as we see. So as we enter the first scene, what Hushai has the job of doing is convincing Absalom, who knows that he was one of his father's counselors, that he's now going to be honest to him, and are loyal to him is the word he uses, using the Hebrew chesed, as we'll see. And it's left wide open, and we have to decide for ourselves, although we already know that David has sent Hushai in as a double agent. So let's just jump right into our first scene here. It's a very long scene indeed, and we'll just look at this first part. As in the previous scene, there's no now in the Hebrew here. It's literally, as you can see on the right side, and Absalom and all the men of Israel. And I note here that sometimes the text will say Israelites, which could have gender inclusivity, but it's all the men. Sometimes it'll have troops, which sounds like men, and it's actually people. So the NORSV gets it backwards in both places for reasons I can't quite understand in terms of gender. And I also note, in addition to the keywords that are throughout, mostly the players involved, and then words like advice and the continuing go that we saw earlier, because these texts are much about going and coming. But there are also some little local keywords. So we see in our first scene here, all of them omitted from the NORSV, face 3 times, and then we see a friend 3 times up here. That is in the English and the NRSV, and we'll also see other examples that it's awkward in English here, but down here the word for word is the noun and the verb are 4 times in one sentence. So little local things to highlight the themes that are going on, and obviously the immediate theme is who's Hushai a friend to? So let's look at that. So Absalom and, again, all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem. We had thought that maybe they were already there, and that is suggesting that this is simultaneous. That as David was on the Mount of Olives and Absalom was already there, and now David's already down by the fords of the Jordan taking a pause, and Absalom is in Jerusalem. So we can easily see this as simultaneous with the previous scene. Ahithophel was with them or near. And I want to highlight that because with can suggest that he's on their side, and he's posing is on their side. And is he on their side? Hushai, we know, is a double agent, but Ahithophel, we don't know why he'd go over to Absalom, but he seemed to have. But literally, it just simply says he's near. So when Hushai the Archite, as he was called earlier, David's friend, as we also heard earlier, which underscores the ambiguity in his outburst, as we'll see, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom twice, doubled, and one of many doublings we see here, in this case the whole phrase, long live the king, long live the king. And right from the immediate word, we can hear Hushai, the double agent, gives double speech. Virtually everything he says can be interpreted two ways. As my note below has from Brueggemann, his words are, it's wonderfully ambiguous as to which king Hushai is proclaiming. And Halpern adds, Hushai is not exactly stuttering in panic, but signaling the ambiguity of the situation. Finally, Fackelman adds that Hushai, quote, realizes that Absalom's first impression of him is a very sensitive moment. But he's had a long chance to plan for this since this has happened, and he's an experienced royal advisor, so he knows what he's doing. So he repeats that twice. Absalom takes it as being about him. After all, Absalom is the one in Jerusalem right now, and David's long gone. So he asks, and it's a fair question, is this the hesed to your friend? I left it as loyalty on the right because hesed in Hebrew doesn't necessarily convey something to an English-reading person. But it's the central attribute of what Yahweh has toward the people of the covenant throughout Exodus and throughout the Torah and in the prophets. So it can also be simply loyalty, but it involves a deep concern and commitment to be for the other. And Absalom is rightly asking, if you are the royal friend, how could you so quickly betray him and come to me? Why should I trust you? And it's a very good question. And he continues to say, why did you not go with your friend? Which will be echoed at 1925 when David says the same thing in Mephibosheth in the scene that completes the scene that we saw earlier in chapter 16 when Ziba came, and we saw that last time, 2 times ago. So, Hushai's response to Absalom. And as my note below has, Hushai names the essential core of the, quote, approved monarchy, selection by Yahweh and confirmation by the people. Thus his statement, quote, really applies to David. And as Bodner notes, Hushai is now forced to both allay Absalom's suspicions and begin his program of frustrating Ahithophel's counsel. In other words, it requires the careful work of an experienced diplomatic royal friend, but especially a friend of David who understands how deception can work to their advantage. So he says to Absalom, no, but the one whom Yahweh and this people and all the men of Israel, again, men of Israel, have chosen. And isn't that a perfect recall of 1 Samuel 8:18? Let's go back to that and see. And on that day you will cry out because of the king whom you have chosen for yourselves. Although certainly we recall that Yahweh chose both Saul and then David to replace him. So that issue of the king being someone who Yahweh picked and the people choose really goes right to the heart of what this scene is all about. That Absalom is plainly not one that Yahweh has chosen, the people have chosen, but as far as we know, Absalom has no relationship whatsoever with Yahweh. We never see Yahweh conversing with Absalom from Yahweh's perspective, and we don't see Absalom seeking Yahweh or even talking about Yahweh the way we've seen David do. Whether that was pious propaganda or sincere on David's part, it's always impossible to tell what's really going on in David. And whether the character of David is really going on in somebody actually named David or in the mouth and the minds of the Deuteronomistic authors. But in many ways, Hushai here is the voice of the deeper reality, if not the voice of Yahweh, to say the one whom Yahweh has chosen and the people have chosen is the actual king. And that not only goes to the Absalom situation, but it goes to the succession. Why should it be Solomon or Adonijah or anybody? Why not, after each generation, have the people do what they did when there was Samuel back in 1 Samuel 8 and consult Yahweh? But that's not what happens here. So he says, his I will be, and with him I will remain. So it's wonderfully ambiguous. That could certainly reply to David, and it doesn't apply to Absalom. But he continues. Moreover, literally, and the second, as you can see over here on this side, and the second, or we would just say second, but that's what it is in Hebrew, whom should I serve or slave for? Should it not be his son? In my note below, noting that indicating the previous reference was to David, which makes it quite clear. NRSV, as almost always omits body parts, which you can see here. And the second, toward whose face should I serve? Should it not be his son? Just as I have served toward your father's face, so I will serve toward your face. And that's not just Hebrew language decoration. being face to face is key to authority in relationships. So as Moses and Yahweh talked like a friend face to face, and perhaps that scene is in the background here, although my take is that Exodus is written later. Perhaps the Exodus scene is remembering this. It's hard to know. But face to face, where you can see someone eye to eye and trust. And there are many examples of that in the Hebrew Scripture, whether it's facing Yahweh or Yahweh facing people or people facing each other. Most classic is Esau, Jacob facing Esau, where there's 4 faces in the same verse, and he's afraid of that face, and yet to see that face is like seeing the face of God. From the Genesis perspective, that's echoing Genesis 1, that all human beings were made in the image and likeness of God. Our text here doesn't know Genesis almost certainly, but still the royal context would call for face-to-face. So the abstraction here, as I have served your father as I will serve you, misses the key point, that this is personal. And all these relations are personal. He's not just holding an office that he can get fired for and hire somebody else, but he's developed an intimacy of relationship with the king. So Absalom then says to Ahithophel, give us your counsel, what shall we do? Or notice the repeated use of advice here, which I use instead of counsel. Come, give advice, what shall we do? And notice that throughout this, he's not talking to Yahweh at all. He's simply talking to his counselors. So having heard from Hushai, he doesn't answer, does he trust Hushai? He simply jumps right over that and goes to Ahithophel. So give us your counsel, what should we do? And we'll look at the first part here. And Ahithophel says to Absalom, go to your father's concubines. As my note below has, his advice matches precisely what Abner did in 3:7 when he sought to take the place of Ishbosheth, Saul's son, as the leader over Israel in the north. Here the concubines remain symbolic of the northern tribes, as we saw in 15:16 and we'll see in 23. Graham Auld notes, effectively scorns the old king as a non-person to go into his concubines. So Ahithophel offers, go into your father's concubines, the one he has left to look after the house. He knows about that, and we know about that. And as I was suggesting at the time, back in 15:16, that perhaps David, being more wily than his son, did that on purpose precisely to provoke this situation. Did he provoke Ahithophel to offer this advice? We don't know. Nothing has been said about that. Perhaps Ahithophel is honestly seeking to serve Absalom, but it's going to rebound against him. And all Israel will hear that you have made yourself stinky, or you'll cause a stench in your father's nostrils, as you can see on the right side, echoing what happened to Jacob's point of view when his sons Levi and Simeon killed all the Shechemites after the rape of their sister. And the hands of all who you are with will be strengthened. So that's the advice, to go up there and fulfill, in a sense, although it's not named here, what we heard Nathan say from Yahweh in chapter 12. Yahweh will do all this before this, all Israel, and before this very sun. So is this happening during the day? We don't know. But here it happens, and it doesn't tell us anything about the time of day, although it says before the eyes of all Israel, as you can see here, so presumably it's during the day. So they pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, and tents will become very important in the rebellion, as we'll see in 1 Kings 1, but especially in 12:16. That's the cry, as we'll see also in chapter 20, to your tents, O Israel. So he pitched a tent for Absalom upon the roof, recalling the very place where David's troubles began, at least in terms of the Bathsheba-Uriah situation, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the eyes of all Israel. Did he go into all 10 of them? Well, that doesn't seem likely. Was it a group orgy? The text doesn't go into those kinds of details. But plainly, he's taken his stand, and now Ahithophel will offer additional wisdom on how to complete the mission. We'll continue with that next time. See you then. Bye.